I tell you this, BARUUK is one insane frame. Given the right build and setup, he can take the role of being a DPS frame, or the anchor of the defense. The thing about this frame is it is a good kit for crowd control and damage mitigation. His damage part may not be as good as other exalted wielders, but thanks to some stuff that has been added to the game, we can make his Desert Wind deal insane damage even against heavily armored high-level enemies. There may be challenges in using BARUUK, like maintaining his Serene Storm ability, or keeping the damage mitigation from your Desolate hands, but don't worry, as that can be taken care of by properly modding this frame and knowing how to use each of his abilities. And that's my job, to give you all the details you need to play BARUUK like a boss. So, let's cut this long introduction and proceed to the build section of this guide, wherein I will show you how to mod BARUUK for defensive and offensive purposes. Modding BARUUK for defense is pretty simple and straightforward. All you need to do is prioritize range first, and then efficiency. A defensive BARUUK is a caster frame, wherein we will take advantage of his crowd control abilities. We will be spamming our lull ability most of the time, which allows us to gradually slow enemies within 58 meters radius, before finally putting them to sleep. Now low duration build is good for BARUUK as it lets us spam our second ability. Fleeting Expertise plus Transient Fortitude will allow us to use lull after every 3 seconds, which is enough for my playstyle. I could remove Primed Continuity on this slot, and further lower the duration of lull, but I did not do it because lull may be the primary ability that we will be using. However, it's also good that we can make good use of his other abilities. Primed Continuity is a good option for this build so that I can also use my Elude ability. In missions like Excavation or Cover Survival, you need to move from one point to another. Elude is great in dodging all the damage of the enemies while moving from point A to point B. It's more like Limbo's Rift but requires energy to work properly, and Primed Continuity does allow this build to lower the energy drain of Elude. Of course, I also need Primed Flow for that huge energy pool. The rest of the mods are for damage mitigation or survivability purposes. I did add these Umbral mods, along with Transient Fortitude to give me a little boost in power strength. That way, I can have 37% damage mitigation while my Serene Storm is active, and as well as have some damage reduction from my Desolate hands. But don't think that Desolate hands will be our main source for damage mitigation for this defensive build. With my build, you will only have 12 daggers, and remember, you need at least 9 daggers to keep that 90% damage mitigation active. Also, take note that my build does have a very high range, which will give the daggers more range to seek enemies. To keep that 90% damage reduction, you must constantly cast your Desolate hands, which I don't recommend doing. So instead of damage mitigation, think of your Desolate hands as another way to crowd control enemies. It's another way to defend the target, as it allows you to disarm enemies, taking away their range attacks. It perfectly synergizes with your lull ability, and in fact, both of these abilities will allow you to be a good point of defense. When it comes to damage mitigation, just rely on your Serene Storm. Anyway, you can easily erode your restraint and keep your fourth ability active, as you will most likely be casting all your other 3 abilities most of the time. To be honest, you actually don't need damage mitigation when you are defending a target, as your crowd control abilities are most certainly enough. But if you really think that that's not enough survivability, don't forget that you can freely cast your Elude to not take any damage at all, and also remember that you can safely cast your lull and Desolate hands while your first ability is active. So when enemies are asleep, you can just easily murder them with your Desert Wind or any weapons that you prefer. My defensive setup for BARUUK may not need a lot of power strength, but when it comes to being offensive, it's all about having as much power strength as possible. If you want to do some serious damage with BARUUK, then you need to give him over 300% power strength, not just to increase the damage of his Desert Wind, but to also give you lots of damage mitigation. Now, this is another contrast to my defensive setup. That setup doesn't need any damage mitigation, but this one will be relying mostly on damage reduction, simply because we are talking about killing enemies here at the fastest time possible. If we are going into missions like long survival runs, then it's all about kills per seconds, and it would not be wise to rely on Elude, as it will make you a sitting duck. Instead of dodging, we will be reducing the damage taken by BARUUK. Aside from a lot of power strength mods, we also would want to add adaptation on our build, to add more damage mitigation for BARUUK. However, adaptation alone won't work, as we all know. This mod needs a few hits to reach 90% damage mitigation from a particular damage type. we need to complement it with the damage mitigation coming from our Serene Storm and Desolate Hands. Okay, now let's talk about how to fully benefit on Desolate Hands damage mitigation. First off, each dagger will give you 10% damage reduction, and as you can see, the damage mitigation caps at 90%, which means that we need at least 9 daggers floating on BARUUK. So basically, once your dagger depleted to 10 or 9, it's time to recast Desolate Hands once again to maintain that 90% damage reduction. It's easy when you are running missions solo, but it would be hard to keep the damage mitigation when you are with a team. It's because those daggers will transfer to teammates once they are in range. And remember that it will also seek out enemy units to disarm them, so most probably, you need to recast Desolate Hands over and over again. Best thing to do is, just use this build for solo plays, or, if you really want to use this build, then just trim some power strength by removing Blind Rage, and replacing it with Primed Continuity. In this way, you can use your elude to block almost all frontal damage. The rest of the incoming damage will be taken care of by your damage mitigation. You don't need to worry about energy, as you have the Rage mod to restore it when you are taking damage from enemies. Now let's talk about maintaining your Serene Storm. Usually, you will be relying on both Lull and Desolate Hands to erode your restraint bar with this build. Since I have less duration for this build, you can spam your Lull ability and you can easily erode your restraint bar. Anyway, you will also have lots of daggers with your Desolate Hands to help you out erode the restraint bar quickly. Now I have tried several mod setup for my Desert Wind, but in the end, I will be sticking with my Critical Condition Overload build. Even though this Exalted Fist has a measly 10% status chance, this doesn't mean that we can't benefit from the Condition Overload mod. Remember that we can apply status with any status-based primary or secondary, and then switch back to our Exalted weapon to finish the job. By the way, Shattering Impact does work with Desert Wind as it deals impact damage. Life Strike also works with its wind waves, but Drifting Contact or any melee combo counter doesn't increase the combo multiplier if you are just using the wind waves of Desert Wind. You need to inflict direct hits to enemies, so combo counter mods would work with your Desert Wind. It's the same mechanic with Excalibur's Exalted Blade. Also, if you like, you can add a faction-specific mod on your build instead, to add more damage to your Desert Wind while facing a particular faction. However, no matter how much damage mods you put into this build, we can't deny the fact that it's still not that good against high-level armored units. But like I've said earlier, there's a solution to that, and that is applying a lot of status first, by using guns like the Zakti, before sending those waves of destruction coming from your Desert Wind. This is the new meta that the recent melee rework has brought. It's a good change since we can use our favorite critical weapons at high-level missions, without worrying that it won't deal that much damage. Just don't forget to put Condition Overload on the build. Last but not least, do not forget that you can do combos with your Desert Wind. Unlike any other stances, Serene Storm doesn't have any additional damage, nor guaranteed /procs while performing a certain combo. It's all about pure crowd control, which allows you to pull, push and even ragdoll enemies while performing each of its combos. That is why, if you want to do some serious damage with your Exalted Fist, do not forget to incorporate the Status Gun plus Condition Overload combo in your arsenal. Okay, now let's proceed to the very special part of this video, and that is the BARUUK new augment ideas. Digital Extremes did email all partners, including your noob leader, asking us to participate in creating a new augment mod for this frame. But not just us partners can design BARUUK's first new augment. Our community, including you, can help out by sharing your ideas on the comment box below. Take note that it's one augment per ability, so if you have something in mind for each of BARUUK's abilities, then feel free to comment it below. For now, I will be sharing my augment ideas for BARUUK's. But before we start, I would just like to apologize if the name of my augments are a bit cringy. I'm not good with names, so for his first ability, I call it Inner Peace. Cringe Fest started. But anyway, what this augment does to BARUUK's elude ability, is give it to 100% aggro. Enemies within a certain radius will be aggro by BARUUK for a couple of seconds. The aggro radius, and as well as how long it will last, are affected by both range and duration mods. But that's not all. Projectiles that pass through BARUUK while elude is active will deal 300% damage to any enemies that it hits. The catch is, BARUUK movement speed will be slowed by 50% while he's using elude. Just imagine BARUUK walking in all that chaos and just letting enemies murder each other with their own toys. Now I don't have something fancy for his second ability. Lull is a pretty great crowd control ability at its current state, but if I would give it an augment, I would call it radioactive respite. Instead of putting enemies to sleep, they will be inflicted with radiation proc. For his third ability, I have considered two ideas. The first one is called controlled desolation. The use of this augment is pretty simple. It allows you to manually use the daggers. In this way, you can control how much daggers you have. This augment totally removes the seeking feature of the daggers, which means it will not also transfer to allies. You can manually give them daggers by simply targeting your allies and pressing the third ability again. The other third augment idea will somehow solve BARUUK's low DPS while using Desert Wind, without the condition overload combo. The idea is, this augment will allow you to manually detonate all daggers and, each dagger will seek and reduce a target's armor. How much armor it can reduce depends on how much power strength you equip on your BARUUK. This augment will be called corroded daggers, or, you can just call it I just stole Ash seeking shurikens. That's better. And finally, the last augment will be for his fourth ability called Pacifista's Rage. This augment will increase the damage of your Serene Storm by 300% at max. The amount of damage percentage will be determined on how much power strength you equipped BARUUK. Aside from the damage buff, your Desert Wind can erode BARUUK's restraint by 1% per enemy you kill. However, the restraint bar will fill much faster when you have this augment, so basically, you need to kill them fast, if you want to keep airbending. And that's all about it. I hope that you have learned something from my guide, and I also hope that you find my augment ideas for BARUUK interesting. Don't forget to share your augment ideas in the comment box below. If I find your augment more fun and suited for BARUUK, then I will send them to Digital Extremes instead of my augment ideas. So, be sure to leave your entry on the comment box below. Thank you so much for watching. Squad Leader signing off.